So let's renew our altruistic motivation for participating in this seminar. So one way we can generate such an attitude is by reflecting on how we are dependent on others for everything in our life, even our body, just this very body, which is the basis of our life, came from others, our mother and our father. And for our body to be able to grow and be healthy and strong and survive, we are dependent on those who provide us with food and drinks, clothing, medicine, housing. And to have knowledge, enabling us to learn and study, get a job, support ourselves. We are dependent on others who taught us all that we know, who produced the textbooks and other learning materials we used in our education, those who built the schools and classrooms and desks and so on that we used while we were going to school and so on. Those are just some examples, but if we check carefully in every aspect of our life, everything we have, everything we use, everything we enjoy, comes from others. And this is true every day of our life. Without others, life would be very different. Maybe it wouldn't exist at all. We wouldn't even be able to survive. So see if that can give rise to a sense of appreciation, gratitude towards others, and the wish to repay their kindness, to benefit them in return. There are many ways we can do that. Helping out when people need help, just being kind and friendly. But also developing our mind, our potential for higher states of mind, especially enlightenment, Buddhahood, enabling us to be of the greatest possible benefit to others, to all living beings. So see if you can make that your motivation, a reason for participating in our activities today, listening and thinking about and meditating on these teachings of the Buddha. So, I'm planning to start this session with a meditation, but before getting into that, I want to share something I read in Philip Kaplow's book, The Zen of Living and Dying, that I think is important for us to keep in mind with regard to meditating on death. So this appears in his chapter, which is called Meditations on Death. He presents different ways of meditating on death. And there's a cautionary note here that I think is important for all of us. He says, those who are strongly repelled by the thought of confronting their own demise, even in a symbolic way, as well as those who have suffered from mental illness, particularly depressive disorders, and those who are psychologically fragile, are cautioned to avoid the more intense type of death meditations described here. To undertake them under these circumstances could result in an increase in fear and anxiety rather than a lessening of them. Children, too, should not attempt these exercises. Yeah. So often, Buddhist meditations are just presented in universal way, like everybody should do these practices. It's essential. It's important that everybody do these practices. But I think what he says here is very wise advice, that you do need to be psychologically stable, healthy, balanced to be able to do any kind of meditation, even mindfulness, even loving kindness. It's possible that even such meditations could cause your mind to become even more imbalanced and lead to other kinds of problems. So I think, we need to approach this meditation with caution. And if we find that trying to meditate on death, or even thinking about death, talking about death, brings up very strong and overwhelming fear, anxiety, and other kinds of disturbing emotions, then maybe it's better, instead of pushing ourselves to keep going, to stop, maybe take a few steps back, talk to a spiritual teacher, talk to a therapist, just seek advice before continuing to do such meditations. Because sometimes I've met people who told me that they are just totally terrified of death and they just can't think about it without feeling intense fear. So I think, if that's the case, it's probably good to seek help from psychotherapy or just talk with spiritual teachers to try to work out what this fear is all about, rather than just attempting on your own to think about death. And I remember one time I was leading a course like this in a center and leading the 9-point meditation on death. And one woman came to me during a break and told me she couldn't do the meditation. She had to step back from following the meditation. And her reason was she was a single mother with 2 children under the age of 10. And she just couldn't conceive of her not being there for her children, of her children being without their mother. That was just too frightening, too awful to consider. And so we talked about it. And, I said, is there anyone? Because I thought that was an issue she did need to face, rather than totally avoid it, because it could happen. So I suggested that she try to find somebody who would be willing to take over the care of her children, just in case something like that happened. And she did. She thought her ex-husband wouldn't be capable. He was just not right to do that job. But she thought maybe her mother could do it. So I tried to open to her a way to, deal with that situation. And I didn't feel it was right to push her. I think it's never right to push somebody. No, you have to do this. You have to think about your own death and so on. So that's just one example of a case where, a person isn't ready. They're not in the right state of mind or the right situation in their life to be able to fully contemplate this topic. Yeah. And and also another thing he says here, I think is very helpful, that it's good to where is it? To balance reflection on death with reflection on the precious human life. He says, in connection with these reflections and as an adjunct to them, one needs to remind oneself again and again of how fortunate one is to have the rare privilege, the good karma of being born as a human being in this lifetime, and that the deepest purpose of human life is to awaken the meaning of birth and death. So if we do find ourselves feeling a lot of fear and anxiety, or maybe despair and depression, I'm going to die and there's nothing I can do about it, and life is so meaningless, anything like that, in that direction, we need to go back. Because in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, the meditation on the precious human life, how fortunate we are to have this human life, and how important it is to use our life wisely, in practicing Dharma, helping others, and so on. So that precedes meditation on impermanence and death. So ideally, you already, done a lot of work in that area, and you have a good sense of purpose in life, and the sense of how fortunate you are to have this life. So, if you find meditating on death doesn't have such a good effect on your mind, go back to that one. Remind yourself of that one. Because the purpose of meditating on death is not to end up feeling scared and anxious and depressed and despair. So if that's happening in your mind, you need to check, maybe you need to make some adjustments somewhere. And also balance this meditation with meditations that are positive and uplifting, like Precious Human Rebirth, and also Buddha nature. Just remembering we all have the Buddha nature, the potential to be free of suffering, free of death and rebirth. We all have the potential to reach enlightenment. So do something to bring yourself out of a state of fear or depression. Okay, so let's do the meditation on the middle 3 points of the 9-point death meditation. I talked about those yesterday afternoon, and I said we would meditate on them this morning. So, get yourself into a comfortable but conducive position for doing meditation. So that means find a balance between being comfortable, but not too comfortable, not like lounging on your couch, but try to sit up straight, either in a chair or on a cushion on the floor. Sitting up straight helps your mind to be more clear, focused. But in addition to sitting up straight, it's important to be relaxed, not tight and tense. Try to relax all the muscles in the body, except those that you need to keep your back upright. And for those who do have back problems, it may be hard to keep your back completely straight. So you might need to make some adjustments or compromise to have a good position and a relaxed position. You can let your eyes close or keep them open a little bit so there's light coming in to help you stay awake and alert. And spend a few minutes being aware of the natural rhythm of the breathing, the breath flowing in and flowing out. That's a good way of settling the mind down in the present, right here, right now. And if there are other thoughts in your mind about other things not related to what we're doing here, put those aside for now. You can always pick them up again later. But try to really keep your mind focused on this meditation that we're going to do. So yesterday morning, you did a meditation on the first 3 points of the 9 points of the death meditation, which are basically about the certainty of death, the fact that death is definitely going to happen to each one of us, and everyone else in the world is just a natural part of life. And we're heading in that direction all the time. Our life just keeps getting shorter all the time. So it's like we're on a journey traveling towards the end of our life, towards our death. So just remember the conclusion you came to after doing that meditation. hopefully that death is definitely going to happen to me and there's no way I can avoid it. And if thinking about death and dying is frightening to you, just be aware of that, acknowledge that, don't be in denial about it. But at the same time, understand that it's something impermanent, not permanent. Just because you're uneasy or frightened about death right now doesn't mean you will always feel that way. There are things we can do to work on our fear, manage it, and even overcome it, get beyond it. So now let's move on to the second main part of the meditation, which is contemplating the uncertainty of the time of our death. This is important to do because even if we accept that we're going to die, we might have the feeling that it's not going to happen anytime soon. We feel that it's way off in the distance, in the future, years and years and years away. But can we be sure of that? So there are 3 points to reflect on here. The first is that human lifespan or human life expectancy is not definite. It isn't the case that every human being who is born will live the same number of years before they die. Instead, people die at all different ages of their life. Okay, so it's helpful to bring to mind actual examples of people you know, or people you've heard of that illustrate this. So some human beings don't even make it to birth. They die in the womb. Others die during the birth process or shortly afterwards. Others die as infants before they've even learned to walk, and so on. So just think about how at different stages of life, infancy, childhood, teenage years, young adults, and so on, middle age, people can die. And then bring this understanding to yourself, your own case. We've made it into adulthood, but we might think, I'm not that old. Death happens to really old people, people in their 80s, 90s, or over 100. So I probably still have a long time left, a long way to go before I die. But again, can you be sure of that? So then the second point to contemplate, the second reason as to the uncertainty of the time of death, is that there are many causes of death, many ways that death can happen. So this is helpful in case we have the idea that we are healthy, we don't have any serious illness, a terminal illness like cancer. So we're relatively healthy. So we may feel, well, I'm not going to die anytime soon. People who have cancer or who have heart disease or had strokes and so on, different serious illnesses, they'll probably die soon, but not me. So is this correct to think that way? So illness is a major cause of death, but it's not the only one. There are many other ways that people die, different kind of accidents that can happen while traveling in a car or plane or boat or train or even bicycle or even going for a walk. So again, it's helpful to try to bring to mind examples of this that you've heard of, people you know, people you've heard of who have died in such a way, and how it can happen just so suddenly out of the blue, without any warning, without expecting it. So something like that could happen to us as well while we are traveling. But right now, not many of us are traveling. We're not allowed to. We're staying at home. We might feel kind of safe at home, but there are also things that can happen at home that can cause death. Fires or gas leakages or natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, forest fires, tornadoes, depending on where you live. So even at home, we're not really safe from death. Death can still happen, and it does happen. So again, think of real examples of this. People you know, people you've heard of who died at home. also we are reminded to think about how even things that are normally meant to prolong life, keep us alive and healthy, can become causes of death. For example, eating and drinking. We've probably all heard stories of people who die from eating food that was poisoned or contaminated, or eating too much, or the food getting stuck in their throat and they choke. And there's also lots of people who die because they're unable to find food and drink. Then the third point is that our human body is actually fragile. We may feel as if our body is strong, we have a lot of energy, we can do lots of things. We may even feel kind of invincible, like nothing could take me down. But is this true? Or is it a fantasy, an illusion? So this is particularly obvious at this point in time, now that we're dealing with this pandemic, this new virus that just suddenly appeared a couple months ago and is now infecting millions of people around the world and has already caused many deaths and continuing to cause many deaths. So it's something so tiny, so minute, we can't even see it with our eyes without the use of a powerful microscope. And that this tiny, tiny, tiny virus is able to cause so many deaths, even to people who are very strong, well-built, healthy. So just try to get a sense of how the feeling of being strong and healthy and invincible is kind of an illusion, a fantasy. So now, as a conclusion to the meditation, see if you can understand that in addition to death being certain, something that will definitely happen to us, when that will happen is uncertain. We really don't know when it will happen. We don't know how much more time we have. And it's even possible death could happen to us this year, even this month, and even today. And if we see the value of Dharma practice as preparation for death, it's important not to postpone doing Dharma practice, but start as soon as we can, even right now, even today. So I'll try to leave some time at the end of this session for questions. There was one question that came up yesterday that I thought might be good to answer now. Because yesterday I spoke about life obstacles, how I was told by my teacher that there were life obstacles. So somebody asked, what kind of things would be considered life obstacles? And I've never heard an explanation about that and never even thought to ask about it. I just kind of took it. Has anyone else heard any explanation about what life obstacles are?
I haven't heard in a general way, but I do know in Professor Jeffrey Hopkins' own sort of autobiographical reporting in a journal article that recently was sent throughout the community, so I think we all got it, where he talks about one Lama at some point when his youth, when he was in his younger years, said to him out of the blue, you'll have life obstacles at the age of 51, say this mantra when it comes. And then he was really ill and on his deathbed, or not his actual deathbed, but almost dying. And he actually went kind of unconscious and then remembered that mantra, recited it, and then came back. So I guess in that case, it was illness.
Yeah.
It was a sickness.
Yeah. But I guess it's more like, what are life obstacles? And
well, I think that an illness is one, right? An illness, like an accident, those would all be.
Yeah.
I mean, what are they other than that?
Well, I mean, in thinking about it, what I came to was it's got to do with our karma. I mean, and in fact, according to Buddhism, even though we've been talking about the different causes of death, like illness and accidents and so on, but according to Buddhism, the main cause of death is our karma, right? So anything that happens to us is mainly the result of our own karma. And the other things like illness and accidents and so on are contributing conditions that help ripen our karma. And so there's actually an explanation of different causes of death, and I found it in here. This is Venerable's book, The Foundation of Buddhist Practice, Holiness and Venerable Children. So I've seen them explained a little bit differently in different places, but I'll read what it says here. This is holiness, so definitely reliable. Death occurs, this is on page 207 if you want to look it up. Death occurs owing to 4 situations. Number 1, exhaustion of the lifespan. The karma that brought about that life is exhausted, and that lifetime ceases. So our being born in this present life as a human being is the result of a virtuous karma that we created in the past. That was like a throwing karma that kind of threw us or propelled us into this life. And that karma also determines how long we have to live, our lifespan. So it's already been, it sounds like, determined by the karma that brought us into this life. So we're kind of already born with a certain number of years of life, although nobody knows how much that is. Maybe Buddha could tell us. But so that's one cause of death. So most people, we have a lifespan, and when we come to that number of years, then that's it. The second is exhaustion of merit. Merit is required to stay alive once we are born, and when it runs out, death occurs. The karma that maintains the lifespan may still be intact, but the person lacks the merit to receive food, shelter, clothing, or medicine, and death occurs. So let's say, I'm born with a 90-year lifespan, but, at the age of 70, there's a famine, shortage of food, or war happens, and I get caught up in the middle of it. So this would be the result of a lack of merit. My merit has run out to continue living. So I might die even before my predetermined lifespan runs out. So that's another cause of death happening. So maybe this is where obstacles could come in. Yeah, you have other factors interfering with you being able to live out your full lifespan. So this is very common, right? And this could also include things like accidents or illness, coronavirus, murder, war, and so on. And number 3, both of the above occur simultaneously. So you might reach the end of your determined lifespan, and then you also run out of merit. So then, conditions will come about for your death to happen. Number 4, ripening of destructive karma. Even though the lifespan and merit may not be exhausted, the seed of a strong destructive karma ripens and cuts short the lifespan, bringing an untimely death due to an accident or unexpected illness. Okay, so some strong negative karma that you created in the past might ripen, and then you would meet with circumstances that would cause your death. So, I guess so if we, get into an accident or get killed in a war or get coronavirus, it would be hard to know if this is the case of ripening of a destructive karma as a number 4, or, lack of merit as a number 2. It would probably take a Buddha or somebody with high realizations to be able to tell, which of those is happening. Anyway, so this is interesting that, how long we have to live, what happens to us to cause death, and so on. It's related to our karma. That's the main cause, the main factor. And then there would be other factors, contributing factors. So hopefully that will answer that person's question. They do say in Tibetan astrology, I think it is, that every 12 years is an obstacle year. Is that right? Like, have you heard that? Like when you're 12 years old, when you're 24, when you're 36, when you're 48, and so on. And then I've also heard 60 is the big one. That's a big obstacle year. So often, for lamas and other practitioners, they'll do extra special practices and pujas and so on to clear away the obstacles and make sure they continue living. But then I've also heard His Holiness say he doesn't believe in astrology. So there's different opinions, different points of view about that. And I have to say, when I think back in my life, I can't remember any particular problems happening at the age of 12, 24, 36. So, maybe it happens to some people and not to others. Or maybe it also depends on your merit. If you got, a lot of merit and a lot of good karma, then that would overpower obstacles. So I don't know. It's complicated. complicated issue. Did you have a question, Venerable?
One of the things working in hospitals that was very apparent was many people would come into the hospital with maybe a simple thing and get treatment and die. And then somebody else would come into the hospital with a huge, tremendous difficulty and, illness or accident or whatever, that you would think they should die, and they do not. And so this really speaks to that to me. So, and it also, for me, brings a lot of calmness to my mind, because it's going to happen when these things run out. And, I can do things about, ethical conduct, of course, and all those things. But really, when it comes down to it, when, it's exhausted, and then I will die.
So we do what we can to maintain our life, prolong our life, keep away causes of death and so on. But inevitably, because like with this coronavirus, it's there. Some people get exposed to it, but they don't catch it. And then some people catch it and die. Other people catch it and don't die. So, I think the doctors and scientists and so on are trying to find all these factors, your lungs, your heart, your age, your race. But, they don't consider karma. And they don't know. Nobody can really know what a person's karma is. So all you do is just try to take care of people, prevent people from getting it, prevent people from dying. But there's, we're not God. We can't. Anyway, there's no God in Buddhism, but we can't, control this situation and make sure everybody survives. Nobody gets it to start with. So it does help to have this perspective of our karma. And also karma isn't fate. Sometimes people think karma is like fate, and you have the karma to have such and such experience. There's nothing you can do to avoid it. But that's not true either. We can change our karma. We can create as much good karma as we can in this lifetime, and that might have the effect of prolonging our life, even if we might have had a chance of dying earlier. And on the other hand, if you create a lot of negative karma, a lot of destructive karma in this lifetime, then that could bring an early, untimely death. So it's really helpful. And in fact, in the book by Philip Kapleau, he has a whole huge section about karma, the importance of knowing about karma and living in accordance with that. So then I thought to go on and talk about the last 3 points of the 9-point death meditation, and then in the next session, who's leading that? Would it be okay to lead that? So you can meditate on these in the following session. So the main point here is only spiritual practice can help us at the time of death. That's the ideal, desired conclusion to come to by meditating on these. So the 3 points, subpoints that we meditate on here are, first of all, so here we're getting into actually thinking about the time of death, and trying to imagine that situation and what would be helpful us at that time. Because I think it's only natural that we'll feel scared and apprehensive, and what normally happens when we're in a difficult situation is we seek help. We try to find help. I can't do this on my own. I need help. So during our life, when we face difficult situations, one source of help, probably the number one source that we turn to, would be people. Our family, our friends, our loved ones. Right? And most of the time, if we're fortunate to have good friends, good family, they will be there for us. They will give us help. Whatever they can do, they will help us. But at the time of death, again, most people would wish to have family and friends there to be with them during that time and give them support and give them comfort and be able to say last goodbyes and so on. But so how much help can they actually give us? So in the teachings, they usually say they can't help us at all, which I think is a bit extreme, because they can help us to a certain extent. If our dying takes a certain amount of time, it is helpful to have loved ones around that we can talk to, that can hold our hand, that can tell us how much how they love us, and so on. And also with practical things, feeding us and helping us bathe and so on, if we can't take care of ourselves. So we can get a certain amount of help from loved ones as we are dying. But there's caveats there. One thing is, there's no guarantee they will be there, because it's possible that we might die away from home. We might be in a plane, or we might be in another country when death happens, and they can't get there in time. So they may not be there. It's not a guaranteed thing. So to totally rely on that and cling to the idea, they'll be there and they'll help me, that it'll be okay. But that's not definite. And I guess now I was thinking about the coronavirus, when people are in the hospital dying from coronavirus and their family members are stuck at home, locked down, not allowed to come and see them. That's happening, right? So people are dying without their family nearby. Maybe they can talk on the phone or something, but so there's no guarantee that our loved ones will be there. And even if they're there, if we think about it, realistically, the people we're close to, how much help can they really give us? Because when I was in Singapore, I was sometimes invited or requested to go to the hospital and help somebody who was dying, say prayers for them and so on. And I sometimes observed the interaction of, the family. Most of the people I saw, they were not able to give any emotional help or spiritual help to the dying person. They were just so overwhelmed by their own grief and sadness and fear, and so they needed help. Okay, they needed help to deal with this situation. So, and I remember meeting one man who told me his daughter died. She was 25, and I don't know how old he was, but anyway, he said that she's the one who helped him. He was having a really hard time dealing with his daughter's death, but she was very strong. She was a Christian, and I guess her faith, her religious beliefs and practices just made her really strong. So she was able to give him help with her death. So, how much help can they actually give us? Because it's a good chance they're going to be caught up in their own emotions. And that itself could interfere with us being able to die peacefully. If they're clinging to us, what will I do when you're gone? I won't be able to live. I won't be able to be happy. A lot of attachment, a lot of clinging. So how would that affect our mind? Would that enable us to just be able to, like this monk yesterday saying, I want to be able to smile and everybody around me feel comfortable and happy. But it would be hard, I think, to pass away peacefully if we have people clinging to us like that. In fact, I've heard sometimes, in some cases, when someone is dying, it's almost like they wait until everybody's gone, everybody's out of the room, and then they go. That could be one reason, one factor. Just leave me alone. Let me go in peace. And then, of course, once we do die, the meaning of dying is our mind. We'll get into this later when we look at the 8 stages of death, but it sort of goes from a more gross level to a more subtle level. And as we go through that process, we lose our ability to see, to hear, to speak, and even remember the names of people and recognize them. So our mind is kind of going deeper into itself, and we're getting further and further away. Even though the body is still there on the bed, but mentally we're getting further and further away from the people around us, and none of them can go with us, even if they wish to. Like that story of the merchant. His first wife was willing to go with him, but nobody can. Nobody can go with us through the process of dying. It's a journey we have to make all alone. So this is the real meaning of this point, that when we die, we die alone. We go alone to the next life and leave all those people behind. And this is very sad, and it takes time for people to adjust to, but it is the reality, and it's important that we get our minds around this reality before it's actually happening to us, just to realize I'm going to leave all these people behind and they can't go with me. So if we have strong attachment and clinging and dependence on people, even one person, that will make it hard for us to die peacefully and be able to just leave them and go. That makes sense? So this is a strong incentive to work on our attachment. Doesn't mean cutting ourselves off from people, of course. It doesn't mean that. But continuing to have love, kindness, compassion, care, healthy relationships with others, but trying to weed out the attachment, the clinging. Easy to say, not easy to do, but it is possible. Gradually, we have lots of methods in Buddhist teachings for working on decreasing attachment while maintaining love. So that's the goal. That's the ideal. Maintain the love, the kindness, the compassion, but without the attachment, the clinging. And in fact, contemplating death and impermanence in death is one of the best ways to overcome attachment, just to realize these relationships are not going to be there forever. Enjoy them while they're there, while we can, but they're going to come to an end. And just slowly get our mind to accept that and acknowledge that. Then number 2, your possessions and enjoyments cannot help. Okay, so again, during our life, when we face difficulties, this is something we might turn to get some relief from the difficulties. We have lots of possessions, our computer, our phone, our TV, our books, our music, our house, our garden. So all these things we own and surround ourselves with, they do give us a certain amount of pleasure and comfort while we're alive. But then we come to the end of our life. How much help can they give us? Yeah, at a certain point, we will probably be there on the bed and not able to get up and go out in the garden and do gardening, or even read a book, or use our computer. So our ability to utilize these things will decrease, and also our interest will probably decrease as well. We might see them as kind of empty of meaning, and they're no longer able to give us any kind of happiness or joy or satisfaction as we realize we're leaving this life and this world. And then again, we can't take any of these things with us. You could be a millionaire or a billionaire, a multi-billionaire, but you can't take even 1 cent of that with you. Even one bit of your belongings, your property, all has to be left behind. So it's interesting to think that a billionaire and a homeless person, an impoverished person who maybe has $1, at the time of death, they're both the same. They're kind of equal in the sense that whatever you have, you leave it all behind. And so we know this intellectually, but it's still helpful to remind ourselves of it again and again to decrease our attachment. Again, sticky attachment. It's very hard to overcome. So reminding ourselves that, this isn't going to be with me forever. And if we do have attachment to our things, that's going to make it hard to die peacefully, because our mind is going to be caught up with, oh, I don't want to leave this behind, and who's going to get this, and are they going to take care of it the way it should be taken care of? So people can get all hung up on these kind of things, which is why it's really good to make a will before you die. And it's never too soon to do that. Make a will and already put down in writing who will get what. And then your mind will be more at ease and free from such concerns as you die. There's a story. You probably heard this story, but it's really funny. They tell this story in the Tibetan tradition of a monk who was dying. He's lying in his bed dying. And he was kind of having trouble leaving. Like, he should have just gone, but he was hanging on. And this was reported to his teacher, who I think was in the same monastery. And the teacher, I guess, had some clairvoyance and could tell what was happening with the monk. And so he sent a message to the monk saying, "There's better butter tea in Tushita." So what happened was he had a bowl. They use bowls in Tibetan Buddhism, wooden bowls. He had a bowl of butter tea sitting next to him on a table next to his bed. So it seemed like his mind was hung up on this butter tea. So when he heard this message from his teacher, maybe he didn't even realize he was attached to his butter tea. So that enabled him to just let go and go. So it just shows how even something as simple as a cup of tea could be a hang-up, cause you to get stuck and unable to let go and just go to the next life. And yeah, it just shows how important it is to give up our attachments. And then number 3 is our body cannot help. So this is probably a subtle attachment that we might not even realize. That we have attachment to our body. We might think, my body, I'm not attached to it. In fact, I don't even like it. It's too fat, or it's too skinny, or it's too this or that. We might not recognize attachment to our body. But then what I think is this, I've been with this body. My mind has been with this body since conception. Continuously, every minute, every second. I've never been separate from this body. So I think just by virtue of that, there's a lot of attachment and identification, strong sense of this is me. And even if intellectually we say, no, I'm not my body, it's just flesh and blood and bones, I'm my mind. We might identify more with our mind, but I think the attachment to our body is very strong, is very there. And and again, while we're alive, we use our body for all kinds of fun, interesting things, traveling and different sports and exercise and, dressing up. Not us, but, people, other people like to go shopping and get all these cool clothes and dress up and so on. And painting our body. So we do get a lot of pleasure from our body and what we can do with our body. But then at the end of our life, our body will probably become a hindrance more than a help, losing our ability to do things. And this is actually what I've heard, a major cause of suffering, when people find themselves unable to do even the most simple things. Like getting up out of bed and going to the toilet. You need help to do that. And there can be a lot of, I guess, mental suffering, a lot of embarrassment and shame and unhappiness that you can't be independent, right? Probably Venerable Jigme's seen a lot of that, yeah. So just the mental suffering of your body breaking down and being unable to do the things you used to do feeding ourselves, drinking, and so on. And then there could be pain, discomfort, all kinds of unpleasant things happening with our body. And then again, our body doesn't go with us. That has to be left behind as well. Our mind separating from our body and everything related to our body, our whole sense of identity with our body. So attachment to our body and identifying with our body could be a hindrance at the time of death, because the whole point, according to Buddhism, and I think all other spiritual and religious traditions, is to have a positive state of mind at the time of death. And positive means free of anger, hatred, free of attachment, free of fear, and these kind of disturbing emotions, disturbing thoughts. Try to be free of those and instead have positive thoughts like love, compassion, at least faith in your object of refuge, wherever that may be, like in our case, the 3 jewels. So being able to focus on something positive at that time and not have our mind, these other thoughts and feelings will probably come up. There probably will be fear and attachment and so on, but to know how to manage them, how to manage those emotions, and instead switch our mind into something positive. So this is the purpose of this contemplation, is to realize, that if we have attachment to loved ones, attachment to possessions and enjoyments, attachment to our body, this will be problematic at the time of death, making it very difficult to die and just let go of all of these things without attachment and go smoothly to the next life. So as a result of contemplating these points, the conclusion that we try to come to is seeing that Dharma practice should be our number one priority, ideally. What I wrote down here is I must prioritize Dharma practice it purely, free of the 8 worldly concerns, and work on overcoming attachment to the things of this life, body, possessions, family, and friends. So that's the ideal conclusion to come to. It may take a while to come to that, but that conclusion then will enable us to live our life in a different way. That doesn't mean giving everything up, giving away all your possessions and cutting yourself off from family and friends, not like that, but working on decreasing the attachment and working on increasing your dedication to the practice of Dharma. So there's actually a question related to this that came in yesterday, so maybe I'll answer it at this time. It's a bit of a long question, but I think it's a question everybody has, at least at some point. So it says, on the one hand, meditating on death reminds us how little time we have and how we can't take the people and possessions from this life with us. And so it motivates us to focus on what matters, Dharma practice. This is clear to me, and I feel that sense of urgency and importance of focusing on Dharma practice that comes from meditating on death. I wonder, however, how do we balance prioritizing that Dharma practice with responding to the people around us in our lives who want our time and attention? Is helping them and responding to them part of Dharma practice, since they are also part of the countless number of beings we want to help? Definitely. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. Unfortunately, it does sometimes happen that people get really into Dharma practice and, I'm doing all these practices and for the benefit of all sentient beings, I'm going to reach enlightenment to help all sentient beings. And they kind of forget about the sentient beings who are right there around them and neglect them and sometimes even harm them one woman told me that she was a single mother with a couple of young children living in a Dharma center. And one morning she was meditating, and her kids were running around the house, just making a lot of noise. And she was trying to meditate, but it got to her. And so at one point she yelled at them. She said, "Will you be quiet? I'm trying to meditate on loving kindness." And it wasn't until much later that she realized the irony of that situation. You know, here she is meditating on loving kindness, but she couldn't even have it for her own kids. So this happens. This is something that can happen to us. So definitely, you know, we're trying to help all sentient beings, but realistically, we need to start with the ones who are closest to us. Your children, your siblings, your parents, your friends, whoever it is around you, people you work with. Okay, so they give us plenty of opportunities to really work on compassion and love and patience, of course, and generosity and ethical conduct. So definitely, that's without question. But then he goes on, or are those relationships and concerns we find ourselves in as part of everyday life a distraction from Dharma practice, since we can't take any of that with us? Where is the line, if there is one, between the important practice of altruism to help all beings and the way doing so can actually get in the way of the pursuit of other forms of Dharma practice, the very thing that would make us most capable of best helping them? So I think, what he's asking here is, how do you find the balance? If there are people there who are close to you, you're close to them, they may have needs of you, demands of you, wishes of you, and you want to be kind to them and help them and you know, practice your love and compassion and altruism and so on. But on the other hand, you want to have time for your Dharma practice. So I think probably everybody finds themselves with this kind of dilemma. Yeah, even us, we're monastics, we're living in a monastery, but we have our family and friends and other people who might ask things of us or need things of us and so on. So it's a really huge question. And I don't think there's one answer that fits every situation. So instead, I think we have to take each situation, each relationship individually, and we might need to kind of work on where is the balance in between having time to practice Dharma and maintaining a relationship and helping this person. So in some cases, I think it's pretty obvious. For example, children. If you're a parent and you have young children, definitely they need a lot of time and energy. And in fact, that itself can be your Dharma practice. There was one couple who met at a, you know, in the context of Dharma and got together, and then they had their first child, and they went to see Lama with their baby, Lama Yeshe. I'm talking about Lama Yeshe, with their little baby, and he said to them, "Now this is your Dharma practice." So that's clear, you know, if you have a child, you bring a child into the world, you have to take care of that child, do the best you can. And that takes a lot of time and energy, especially in the early years. But, you know, as time goes on, then hopefully you'll have more time to do other kinds of practices and go on retreats and so on. But that's not contrary to Dharma practice. You're taking care of a sentient being, and there's so many things you can do. Practice of generosity, practice of patience, ethical conduct, kindness, compassion, repaying the kindness. If you think that this little being was my mother and my father and did so many things to me, helped me in the past, and now I have a chance to repay his or her kindness. So there's lots of things. Of course, I suppose, you know, not being a mother, I don't know what it's really like, but just the hectic life and the demands and the exhaustion and so on may make it hard for you to be able to maintain such thoughts in your mind all the time. And you probably find yourself getting angry and frustrated and so on. But then that's Dharma practice too, is to learn how to work with that. So hopefully you will have time when the kid's asleep, but then you're exhausted, to do some practice, at least reading, at least listening to teachings. And hopefully you'll have a supportive partner who'll be willing to babysit sometimes while you go off for retreats. You can, I think some couples do that. They take turns going to retreats and looking after the children. So anyway, with small children, you definitely need to take care of them. And then our parents, our aged parents, I mean, they're getting older and they'll probably need help from us as well. And that's also like no question that we need to take care of them. I was once with another nun, and we were having an interview with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and this nun, her father had already passed away many years before. Now her mother was getting older, and she had cancer, and she was living alone. And so the nun was asking, should I go and take care of my mother? And Rinpoche just said, of course. Almost like, no question that our parents need our help. We help them if we can, how we can, and so on. So those are just some examples of cases where it's just without question that we need to put the needs of those people first and try to find time and energy to practice Dharma, because that will enable us to do that kind of work best. I mean, if you don't do your own Dharma practice, then it's easy to get angry and impatient and frustrated and have these kind of afflictions coming up in the mind. So ideally, that's the ideal thing, is to have some time for yourself and your practice and some time to take care of these other people to whom you have responsibilities. And then with other people, it may not be so kind of important, like siblings or friends, aunts, uncles, a little more distant from us. Maybe the responsibility isn't so great, but it's still important to have compassion and kindness and the wish to help them. But then there's so many other factors to consider, such as, do we have the ability to help them? Do we have the ability to give them what they need? Do they want our help? And even if they ask for our help, do they really want to follow it? Do they really want to follow any advice that we may give? So you just have to take, like I say, each situation. And you probably have to maybe go by trial and error. You try one thing and see if that works. And if it doesn't, try something else and maybe take some distance for a while. So, yeah. And I think it's also a process of our own personal growth. I can see that in myself. There were times when I was just like so eager to help somebody, and I had my own fixed ideas about what that meant and, what kind of help they need and how they should change according to my ideas. And then that didn't happen. So then I get frustrated. And yeah, so as we grow in our practice, our wisdom, our compassion, our skillful means, and so on and so forth, then some of these things get worked out. For example, one of my family members has had a long-term problem with drugs and alcohol. And everybody in the family would like this person to stop taking drugs and alcohol. And sometimes they also want to stop taking, and they do sometimes, but then they get back on it again. So, when I'm with that person or communicating with that person, I could see how in the past I was a bit pushy. I really wanted them to get to the place where I wanted them to be. No drugs, no alcohol forever and ever and ever. And then that didn't happen. So now I've gotten to the point where I'm there for you. I love you. I support you. If you want my help, I'll give it. But I'm much less kind of pushy and expecting than I used to be. Because, you can't help somebody unless they want to help. They want to be helped and they want to change. You can't change other people. So these are things you kind of learn as you go along. So maybe I can stop there and see if there are any other questions. Huh? A whole bunch. Oh.
So the first one is, if you have a sudden death, is there something you can do about your karma, like take refuge?
I think so. Because I think even in a couple of seconds, your mind can switch. I mean, our mind does change, many times every second. So even if it's a sudden death, like a car accident or a plane crash or a heart attack, there's the possibility that your mind could switch into something positive if you're really familiar with it. Like I told that story about almost being in a car accident, and just suddenly I found myself saying Tara's mantra without any conscious intention to do so. It was just coming out of my mouth. So to me, that showed that, yes, if you're really familiar with some practice, and thinking, I need to use this practice when I'm in difficult situations, then it's no guarantee, but it's certainly possible that it could come up even in a short, even in a sudden experience like that.
So then the next one is, what are some thoughts about our experience of pain as aversive, arising from our attachment to a physical form from beginningless time? So what are some thoughts about our experience of pain as aversive, arising from our attachment to a physical form from beginningless time?
What are thoughts about seeing pain as aversive, having aversion to pain, in other words, having aversion to pain because of attachment to a physical form for beginnings? That's quite a... Let me think about that. And yesterday I think we did have some questions about pain and how to work with pain. I mean, of course, it would be better not to have aversion to pain, because aversion to pain just makes it worse. So if we can try to overcome the aversion and see it, at least in a neutral way, it's just a sensation. It's just a physical sensation arising from causes and conditions. And it's temporary, it's transitory, it's not something that's going to be there forever. So having those kinds of thoughts about pain can help to decrease the aversion to it. I don't know if it would ever be possible to get to the point where we have enjoyment of pain. That would be maybe a bit strange. But at least a neutral attitude, a non-averse attitude could be helpful.
Okay. Someone says, there are no Buddhists in my family, so I would have to make my prayers quietly. Would my loved one receive the prayers the same?
So this is talking about praying for someone, a loved one who's dying, and that they need to be done quietly?
Yeah, because they're not Buddhist.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing. Actually, I'm going to talk more about that probably tomorrow, helping other people who die. So as a Buddhist, we ideally shouldn't try to force a dying person to agree with our beliefs and practices and kind of push those on somebody else. Instead, we should respect whatever beliefs and practices they have and talk to them in accordance. But with regard to saying prayers for them, that's a tricky thing. I know when my mother died, I was with her, and I wanted to do my Buddhist prayers. And I had the feeling that it wouldn't be contrary to her wishes. It wouldn't be, because I called the priest. She was a Catholic, so I called the priest. But while the priest was on his way, I wanted to do my Buddhist prayers. But I was a little apprehensive because my older brother was there with his wife, and they are very strong Christians, almost fundamentalist. So I was kind of worried, will they object? Will they be unhappy if I do my Buddhist prayers? And fortunately, my brother said, if you want to do your Buddhist prayers, that's fine. So, I mean, I didn't do them at the top of my voice. I just sat next to my mother's body and just did, all the prayers that I could. But I was just very happy that I got his consent. So there was no worry about disturbing his mind. So you just have to take each situation. You know, I mean, if there are people in the room who you feel would object to that, then yeah, maybe it would be better to just do it quietly and in your mind, just not to ruffle anybody's feathers or create any animosity, because that wouldn't be nice, especially if the body is lying there. You want to keep the atmosphere in the room as calm and peaceful and not start arguing, and that would disturb the mind of the person dying. So you have to be very considerate of that, and yeah, just do what you can to do your prayers and practices, but in a way that's not going to upset anybody. And then the question sometimes comes up, but if you can recite them out loud, but the person who's just died isn't a Buddhist, would that be somehow inappropriate, or I don't know what the word is, you know, like not the right thing to do because they're not a Buddhist? That's a tricky one. I don't know if anyone else has ideas about that. Or
I had the privilege of being there when both of my parents died. And my mom was a very strong, devout Catholic. So in the weeks before she died, when we knew she was in palliative, she and I would sing Catholic hymns. And I would fire up the YouTube and we'll get the Latin hymns going. And they could hear the hymns down the hallway and no one minded. And it just took her to a place of being peaceful. And it was familiar. And then a few minutes after she died, I had permission both times from these places to stay several hours there. And then when my family had left, then I started doing Medicine Buddha practice, King of Prayers out loud. I thought, you know, at this point, any help, you know, that this mere ordinary person could offer, I'm sure that this would not, I did it very softly, you know, but that's what I chose to do because, you know, this is my last shot at helping.
I think if I look at it like just logically, like something, then it's some way to help that we know, and the person sort of at that point after death technically isn't Catholic anymore. I mean, if that was, you know, I mean, they don't have their gross conceptual thoughts anymore of I believe this or that, but though it may still have, you know, the imprints of their lifetime of practicing a certain way of thinking and believing may still influence what happens to them in the Bardo and their next life. I don't know if it would make sense to say that they believe the same things at that point. But that said, when my grandmother passed away, and I wasn't there at her actual death, but I was able to get there when the body was still being held at the hospital, and I did go and say the King of Prayers and do other prayers, but at the same time felt a bit awkward. I must say, I just was like, would she really like this? I wasn't sure, but anyway, that was just my reaction.
yeah, I mean, just what popped up in my mind is if your intention is good, you have this intention to reach out and do something beneficial for her, and if she had any awareness of that, I'm sure she would appreciate it. Yeah, just that you're so kind to come visit her and do something to benefit her. Also, I was thinking, you know, one way of thinking about this is that religious teachers and religious figures of all traditions, we could think of them all as coming from the same source, like enlightened mind, Dharmakaya, omniscient mind, manifesting in these different forms. Because there are statements like that in the scriptures, you know, that Buddha can manifest as Brahma, or as, I don't know, we could say Jesus, God, Ishvara, you know. Buddha will manifest in these different forms to help those people who have a connection with that particular form. So it could very well be that Jesus was a manifestation of Buddha, of enlightened mind, Dharmakaya, in that form, which was able to help certain people who have that connection. So if you think about it in that way, there's no contradiction then. Yeah, we're just trying to help everybody get in touch with their nature, their pure nature, whether you call it Buddha nature or whatever, but their nature, their goodness, to be able to bring that out and develop that more and more and more and reach these higher blissful, peaceful states. So if you think about it in a more universal way like that, then there's no contradiction. But of course, some people who are very rigid in their views, you know, would find it hard to believe that. So if those people are around, then it would be better to do it in a more discreet way.
I just want to share a story that has stayed with me from a person who was a nun at the time, was a hospice volunteer. And her client was dying, and he was very Christian, and they had agreed for her to read Psalms to him, and read Psalms, which was fine, lovely. And she was sitting there reading Psalms. He'd passed away. She continued to read. And she had the thought in her mind, if you couldn't see, because she was in robes, right? She said, if you were just hearing me.
Buddhist nun.
Buddhist
Okay.
nun, right, Buddhist nun. If you were just hearing me, you would have no idea that there was a Buddhist and a Christian here. And then she burst out laughing out loud. She said, except that he's been dead for 2 hours. So that was her Buddhist contribution to sharing with this man.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll have more chance tomorrow to talk about dealing with dying people and how to benefit them. Okay, so the next session will be a meditation. You'll do a meditation on those last 3 points, and then this afternoon we'll get into the topic of what are some things we can do to prepare for death, for our own death.